It's simply a warmongering and colonialist ambition, and we have said so often enough that everyone can now see the truth. The truth has been revealed. They want to change the regime in Venezuela to impose a puppet government that would not last even 47 hours.
Well, joining us now from London is Elisabeth Braw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Transatlantic Security Initiative. Thank you very much for joining us on TRT World. So, will Nicolas Maduro break under this US pressure?
Well, what we have seen already is that the Venezuelan Navy has said it will escort merchant vessels and has started escorting merchant vessels, even though the US government, or President Trump specifically, has declared a US blockade. So the Venezuelans are showing defiance, and it's worth remembering that that vessels have the right under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea to travel wherever they like. If they are thought to be violating maritime rules, the coastal state or the flag state has the right to inspect and detain the vessel, but that is clearly not the case here. So it is clear that Venezuela is not planning to accept the US blockade or other US demands.
But what if this escalates? We were hearing there that Venezuela has around 100,000 active troops, but its air defense systems are out of date. And in terms of its allies, such as China and Russia, they've been pretty quiet to this point. So what happens now?
Yes, what happens now, this is the fascinating part. Two things to bear in mind is Venezuela does export a lot of oil, and it exports a lot of it to countries like China. And there are indeed a lot of Chinese nationals and Russian nationals in Venezuela. How will Russia and China position themselves if this standoff intensifies? The second thing to bear in mind is that Chevron is a major US oil producer, is operating in Venezuela, has operated in Venezuela for decades, for generations. It's still there. The question is, how would Chevron, which accounts for a lot of the oil consumed on global markets and indeed in the United States, how would Chevron's shareholders included, react to further US escalation against Venezuela? The third thing to remember is that the United States is thinking aloud about regime change in Venezuela. And that brings a completely new dimension to this conflict.
Let's just expand just very quickly on that then. How much is this about regime change, and is that what ultimately the US President Donald Trump wants?
Donald Trump, and we should say senior US officials and top officials before him, have been very unhappy with Maduro's regime. And it is an undemocratic regime, but Trump is the person who has thought the loudest about regime change. And it was interesting to see Stephen Miller, one of his very most senior advisors, the other day, writing on social media that the oil in Venezuela belongs to the United States and was taken from US companies. So that means the US should have it back, if you read history like that. And what's interesting is that Politico reported I think a day ago, that the Trump administration has reached out to US oil companies, asking them if they would be willing to operate in Venezuela in case of regime change, and they said no. So what happens then? What happens if you dislodge Maduro and American oil companies are just not that interested in doing business in Venezuela?
Okay, we shall watch this story closely. Joining us from London, Elisabeth Braw, thank you very much indeed.